Jesus replied, "May your wisdom equal your zeal, and your courage atone for your ignorance." Though the apostles failed to comprehend much of his teaching, they did not fail to grasp the significance of the charmingly beautiful life he lived with them. 8. Thursday afternoon on the lake. Jesus well knew that his apostles were not fully assimilating his teachings. He decided to give some special instruction to Peter, James, and John, hoping they would be able to clarify the ideas of their associates. He saw that, while some features of the idea of a spiritual kingdom were being grasped by the 12, they steadfastly persisted in attaching these new spiritual teachings directly onto their old and entrenched literal concepts of the kingdom of heaven as a restoration of David's throne and the reestablishment of Israel as a temporal power on earth. Accordingly, on Thursday afternoon, Jesus went out from the shore in a boat with Peter, James, and John to talk over the affairs of the kingdom. This was a 4 hours teaching conference, embracing scores of questions and answers, and may most profitably be put in this record by reorganizing the summary of this momentous afternoon as it was given by Simon Peter to his brother Andrew the following morning. 1. Doing the Father's will. Jesus' teaching to trust in the overcare of the Heavenly Father was not a blind and passive fatalism. He quoted with approval on this afternoon an old Hebrew saying, "He who will not work shall not eat." He pointed to his own experience as sufficient commentary on his teachings. His precepts about trusting the Father must not be adjudged by the social or economic conditions of modern times or any other age. His instruction embraces the ideal principles of living near God in all ages and on all worlds. Jesus made clear to the three the difference between the requirements of apostleship and discipleship, and even then he did not forbid the exercise of prudence and foresight by the 12. What he preached against was not forethought, but anxiety, worry. He taught the active and alert submission to God's will. In answer to many of their questions regarding frugality and thriftiness, he simply called attention to his life as a carpenter, boatmaker, and fisherman, and to his careful organization of the 12. He sought to make it clear that the world is not to be regarded as an enemy, that the circumstances of life constitute a divine dispensation working along with the children of God. Jesus had great difficulty in getting them to understand his personal practice of non-resistance. He absolutely refused to defend himself, and it appeared to the apostles that he would be pleased if they would pursue the same policy. He taught them not to resist evil, not to combat injustice or injury, but he did not teach passive tolerance of wrongdoing, and he made it plain on this afternoon that he approved of the social punishment of evildoers and criminals, and that the civil government must sometimes employ force for the maintenance of social order and in the execution of justice. He never ceased to warn his disciples against the evil practice of retaliation. He made no allowance for revenge, the idea of getting even. He deplored the holding of grudges. He disallowed the idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He discountenanced the whole concept of private and personal revenge, assigning these matters to civil government on the one hand and to the judgment of God on the other. He made it clear to the three that his teaching applied to the individual, not the state. He summarized his instruction up to that time regarding these matters as, "Love your enemies, remember the moral claims of human brotherhood. The futility of evil. A wrong is not righted by vengeance. Do not make the mistake of fighting evil with its own weapons. Have faith, confidence in the eventual triumph of divine justice and eternal goodness." 2. Political attitude. He cautioned his apostles to be discreet in their remarks concerning the strained relations then existing between the Jewish people and the Roman government. He forbade them to become in any way embroiled in these difficulties. He was always careful to avoid the political snares of his enemies, ever making reply, "Render to Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things which are God's." He refused to have his attention diverted from his mission of establishing a new way of salvation. He would not permit himself to be concerned about anything else. In his personal life he was always duly observant of all civil laws and regulations. In all his public teachings he ignored the civic, social, and economic realms. He told the three apostles that he was concerned only with the principles of man's inner and personal spiritual life. Jesus was not, therefore, a political reformer. He did not come to reorganize the world. Even if he had done this, it would have been applicable only to that day and generation. Nevertheless, he did show man the best way of living, and no generation is exempt from the labor of discovering how best to adapt Jesus' life to its own problems. But never make the mistake of identifying Jesus' teachings with any political or economic theory, with any social or industrial system. 3. Social attitude. The Jewish rabbis had long debated the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus came presenting the idea of active and spontaneous kindness, a love of one's fellow men so genuine that it expanded the neighborhood to include the whole world, thereby making all men one's neighbors. But with all this, Jesus was interested only in the individual, not the mass. Jesus was not a sociologist, but he did labor to break down all forms of selfish isolation. He taught pure sympathy, compassion. Michael of Nebadon is a mercy-dominated son. Compassion is his very nature. The Master did not say that men should never entertain their friends at meat, but he did say that his followers should make feasts for the poor and the unfortunate. Jesus had a firm sense of justice, but it was always tempered with mercy. He did not teach his apostles that they were to be imposed upon by social parasites or professional alms-seekers. The nearest he came to making sociological pronouncements was to say, "Judge not, that you be not judged." He made it clear that indiscriminate kindness may be blamed for many social evils. The following day, Jesus definitely instructed Judas that no apostolic funds were to be given out as alms except upon his request or upon the joint petition of 2 of the apostles. In all these matters, it was the practice of Jesus always to say, "Be as wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves." It seemed to be his purpose in all social situations to teach patience, tolerance, and forgiveness. The family occupied the very center of Jesus' philosophy of life, here and hereafter. He based his teachings about God on the family, while he sought to correct the Jewish tendency to over-honor ancestors. He exalted family life as the highest human duty, but made it plain that family relationships must not interfere with religious obligations. He called attention to the fact that the family is a temporal institution, that it does not survive death. Jesus did not hesitate to give up his family when the family ran counter to the Father's will. He taught the new and larger brotherhood of man, the sons of God. In Jesus' time, divorce practices were lax in Palestine and throughout the Roman Empire. He repeatedly refused to lay down laws regarding marriage and divorce, but many of Jesus' early followers had strong opinions on divorce and did not hesitate to attribute them to him. All of the New Testament writers held to these more stringent and advanced ideas about divorce, except John Mark. 4. Economic attitude. Jesus worked, lived, and traded in the world as he found it. He was not an economic reformer, although he did frequently call attention to the injustice of the unequal distribution of wealth. But he did not offer any suggestions by way of remedy. He made it plain to the 3 that, while his apostles were not to hold property, he was not preaching against wealth and property, merely its unequal and unfair distribution. He recognized the need for social justice and industrial fairness, but he offered no rules for their attainment. He never taught his followers to avoid earthly possessions, only his 12 apostles. Luke, the physician, was a strong believer in social equality, and he did much to interpret Jesus' sayings in harmony with his personal beliefs. Jesus never personally directed his followers to adopt a communal mode of life. He made no pronouncement of any sort regarding such matters. Jesus frequently warned his listeners against covetousness, declaring that a man's happiness consists not in the abundance of his material possessions. He constantly reiterated, "What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" He made no direct attack on the possession of property, but he did insist that it is eternally essential that spiritual values come first. In his later teachings he sought to correct many erroneous Urantia views of life by narrating numerous parables which he presented in the course of his public ministry. Jesus never intended to formulate economic theories. He well knew that each